In October 1978, Omaha police lifted a clear fingerprint from a murdered hospital engineer's car. But the match shouldn't come for more than 3 decades. Carroll Bonnet was 61 years old, a hospital engineer, reliable, private, the kind of man whose life was defined by showing up on time and fixing problems before anyone noticed they existed. So, when he didn't come to work, people noticed. At first, co-workers tried the usual explanations. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he'd overslept. But as the hours passed with no phone call, concern shifted into something heavier. This wasn't like Carroll. Police were asked to check on him at his apartment. What they walked into wasn't a simple medical emergency. Inside, the apartment was disturbed. Drawers pulled out. Ticks moved. Thieves. It looked less like a man who'd left in a hurry, and more like someone had been searching for something. Among the quiet disorder, officers found Carroll Bonnet. He was dead. The scene made one thing clear. This wasn't natural causes. Someone had been here. Someone had gone through his life, then taken it. Outside, one major piece of his life was missing: his car. Investigators now had the outline of a case, but very few details. No obvious forced entry that screamed break-in. No clear suspect with a known grudge. Just a ransacked apartment, a missing vehicle, and a man who seemed to have no reason to be targeted. Over the next hours and days, detectives traced Carroll's final movements, last scenes, leaving work, heading home, nothing unusual. No sign of threats. No one waiting outside the hospital doors. Then, a small break. This car was found abandoned in another part of Omaha. Crime scene technicians processed it carefully. They dusted for prints, documented every surface, looking for the one trace a stranger might leave behind. Oh, on the interior, they developed a clear latent fingerprint, distinct ridge detail. Strong enough to be compared. In 1978, that was as close to a smoking gun as they were likely to get. But fingerprints are only powerful if they belong to someone already in the system. Technicians compared the print against known suspects and local records. No match. State and other available files. Still nothing. So, they did what forensic units all over the country did with unsolved cases at the time. They preserved it. The latent print was photographed, documented, and stored on a physical card. It went into a file, then into a drawer. Labeled. Filed properly. Waiting. The investigation slowed, then stalled. Leads dried up. No witnesses came forward with the missing link. Over time, other cases demanded attention. New crimes, new victims, new scenes to process. On paper, the case was cold. In reality, a crucial piece of evidence was still speaking, just in a language that no one, yet, had the tools to translate. For Carroll Bonnet's family and colleagues, there were no technological terms for what they were feeling. Just a simple, painful question. Who did this? And why has no one found him? The answer already existed, captured in that single clear fingerprint. But to reach it, forensic science itself would have to change. Brief pause. Ambience shifts slightly more modern. 2. Because the problem wasn't that the evidence was weak. The problem was that the world in 1978 was too small for it to search. Through the 1980s and into the 1990s, police departments across the United States were drowning in paper. Every arrest, every booking, every fingerprint card from suspects and inmates, all of it stored in folders, cabinets, and warehouse shelves. Before digital systems, fingerprint comparison meant humans working card by card. If the right file wasn't in the right cabinet, the match stayed invisible. In that world, the odds were stacked against the Bonnet case. The attacker's fingerprint existed, but it was buried in paper. Unless the person was arrested in the right place and time, nothing connected. By the early 1990s, This system was clearly failing modern crime. Law enforcement needed something entirely new. The answer became IAFIS, the Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System. Built by the FBI, it wasn't just storage, it was searchable memory. Old inked fingerprint cards were scanned and digitized. Software translated ridge endings and splits into mathematical templates. Millions of these templates were stored in one national database. Now, single fingerprint could be searched against millions in seconds. IAFIS returned possible matches, ranked by similarity. But machines didn't make final decisions. Humans still verified every match. Speed plus human confirmation changed everything for cold cases. Old evidence suddenly had a second chance to speak. In Omaha, a 1978 fingerprint from Carroll Bonnet's stolen car was scanned. Entered into IAFIS, it produced a result in seconds. The system returned a name: inmate Jerry Lynn Watson. Examiners confirmed the match ridge by ridge. After 30 years, the evidence finally led somewhere real. With a fingerprint match confirmed, Omaha detectives reopened the Bonnet case. A lot had changed since 1978. People had moved. Memories had faded. Some potential witnesses had passed away. Rebuilding the story of that night would never be perfect. But one fact now anchored everything. At some point, Jerry Lynn Watson had been inside Carroll Bonnet's stolen car. The IAFIS hit led to one name: Jerry Lynn Watson, then an inmate in Illinois. Back in 1978, he had been living in Nebraska, near the area where Bonnet's stolen car was found, but his name never surfaced in the original investigation. To detectives at the time, he was a stranger. To the fingerprint from Carroll Bonnet's car, he was finally an answer. With this context, the picture sharpened, slowed. The fingerprint wasn't a random transfer or a distant contact. It was a direct connection between Watson and the one major piece of evidence taken from Bonnet's life. Further forensic work, including DNA analysis where possible, supported the link. The case that had once been a wall of unanswered questions now had a door. Authorities moved to charge Watson with Carroll Bonnet's murder. In court, the story of the case was retold, this time with a new chapter. Jurors heard how Bonnet had been found, how the scene had been processed, how the fingerprint from his stolen car had been carefully collected and preserved. They heard about the limitations investigators faced at the time and how the case went cold despite their efforts. Then they heard about IAFIS expert witnesses explained the transition from inked cards in filing cabinets to digital templates in a national database. They described how the latent print from Bonnet's car was scanned, how the system generated a candidate, and how human examiners verified the match to Watson's fingerprints. What mattered legally wasn't the technology for its own sake. It was the continuity, the chain of custody on the original print, the documented procedures used at each step, and the clarity of the comparison. On October 17, 2011, exactly 33 years after Carroll Bonnet's death, for Bonnet's colleagues and family, the verdict couldn't return the years that had passed without answers. But it did something that had seemed increasingly unlikely as time marched on. It named the person responsible. It acknowledged, publicly and officially, that what happened in that apartment had not been forgotten. Inside the forensic community, the case had another impact. Senior crime laboratory technician Laura Casey received recognition for her work on the fingerprint hit, including a national award for the latent print that helped solve a decades-old homicide. It was a reminder that cold does not mean closed, especially when evidence is preserved with the expectation that future tools might see more than present ones can. From a distance, it's tempting to describe IAFIS and the systems that followed it as magic boxes that solve crimes. The reality is more grounded and, in many ways, more meaningful. Databases don't generate justice on their own. They extend human sight. They allow a fingerprint lifted by one technician in 1978 to be compared, years later, to prints taken by another in a different state. They connect. separate moments in time that would otherwise stay isolated. In the Carroll Bonnet case, that connection turned a single unanswered question, whose print is this? Into a name, a trial, and a judgment. The fingerprint never changed. It was the same pattern of ridges and furrows that had been pressed against a car interior on an October night in Omaha. What changed was the world around it, the science, the systems, and the decision not to throw the evidence away when it didn't give easy answers. Evidence doesn't solve cases on a schedule. It waits in boxes, in drawers, in old files for the moment when science finally catches up. In the Carroll Bonnet case, that moment was a single IAFIS search that turned a lonely fingerprint into a name. Ambience fades out slowly,